Hood by J M Bulpett. Read by Jack Collard.
Chapter 6. Night Amongst Monsters. 2 weeks into his stay in Chuffing Sodmore, Robbie seized the opportunity to uncover the mystery Gabriel Sage wished to kept hidden in the old vestry of the church. It was the first night that Robbie had downed a whole pint of hearty badger ale in the Bog Diggers. The locals always left an offering of a pint and were quite blasé about his ghostly presence now, although the jury was still out over whose spirit he was supposed to represent. As soon as he had finished the drink, though, and left the pub that particular evening, Robbie began to feel that gravity had shifted and now seemed to be tugging at different parts of his body with varying force. Finding he needed a little support, Robbie hauled himself up onto the plinth and leant on the torso of the soldier, wondering how the stone statue could be swaying slightly. It was only then that he spotted headlights heading in the direction of the square. Robbie had no need to hide, as he always kept on the invisibility function of his coat at night now, except when it became too cold. He watched with a frown as the black van scythed its way through the darkness, drawing as little attention to itself as possible, and then its engine eased into silence as it pulled up outside the museum. A chinless man with permanently flared nostrils and a smug expression slipped out of the driver's seat. His bulbous eyes swept across the square with a languid disdain before he headed towards Gabriel Sage, who had just swung open the door to the museum. There was contact between the two men's hands for a second, but they remained on the threshold of the building for a few moments talking in low, suspicious tones. Robbie was on the point of considering how to creep into a better position where he might be able to overhear them when he heard Gabriel Sage softly calling, "Robert! Robert!" Fear that he was about to be exposed as not being in his room surged through Robbie. He watched with an agony of anxiety as each window of the museum framed Gabriel Sage for a swift moment or two as he passed it on his way to the place where he expected Robbie to be. Robbie leapt off the plinth but froze when the smug man with the flared nostrils swirled around at the noise. Crouching motionless in the square, Robbie believed he could recall no greater feeling of helplessness in his life. Through the windows of the museum he could see Gabriel Sage approaching his bedroom, halting outside the door, grabbing the handle. But he stopped short of opening it and stepping inside. Then Robbie's name was being called softly once more. After a moment's wait, Gabriel Sage quickly locked the door to Robbie's room and beckoned Nostrils to follow him to the workshop at the other end of the museum. Robbie missed his moment initially. He blamed it on the relief of not being found out and possibly the hearty badger. The two men entered the old vestry of the church and closed the door behind them before Robbie could even enter the building. After a few minutes, Gabriel Sage emerged again, Nostrils following, his smug expression having been exchanged for a look of shock. The two men headed for the van, leaving the door to the room open behind them. Robbie did not need further invitation, but bolted inside with as little noise as possible. A second later, he very nearly bolted back out again. The room was the size of a small church hall, but was populated by a congregation not known to any god. In its center was a vast table with a stone slab as its main surface. Hooked onto the ceiling above the table were pulleys and looping vines of chains, as well as a cluster of large, brutal tools. Dangling from drums that had been fastened to almost every wall were bolts of various fabrics. There also happened to be a bulky chest of drawers in the shape of a pyramid nearby, along with heavy sacks, large plastic drums, and many other items. But all these were incidental to the experience, and Robbie would have no recollection of them later. No person on earth would concentrate on the objects in that room when confronted by the creatures. For some lost amount of time, Robbie stood riveted by the sights around him, his brain unable to process the information his eyes were relaying to it. "Unicorn," he finally uttered. Set a little way back from the door with its head bowed low as if about to charge, brandishing the 5 feet of bone horn spiraling out of the forehead of the magnificent horse, stood a glorious example of the mythical creature. It was not alone. Beside the unicorn reared a griffin, posed as if about to pounce on a victim, its beak gaping, its lion's claws outstretched ready to tear apart the prey, and one long wing arched up over the mane of the unicorn. The far end of the room was dominated by 2 other creations. There could be no doubt that the unicorn and the griffin were magnificent, inspirational even, but these other 2 entities might have been ripped from a nightmare. They were supposed to be representations of a minotaur and a centaur, beasts that were half human and half animal, but even Gabriel Sage had appeared to balk at the idea of using parts of real people. The body of the minotaur and the torso and head of the centaur were specimens of great apes shaved and presented to resemble primitive humans. The massive, muscular bulk of the male gorilla's body seemed to harbor the primal power of an ancient deity. Its ape feet, having been replaced by 2 huge hooves, seemed to signal that the minotaur might have had a relentless pace when in pursuit of its prey. Trailing down its spine was a shaggy black mane that reflected no light. Upon its shoulders was the head of a bison, possessing the eyes of an anaconda and an elongated snout more befitting a wolf, just for an added touch of ferocity, perversity, and authenticity that this genuinely appeared to be a unique species. If anything, the centaur was even more unsettling. Gabriel Sage had chosen a tough, hardy example of one of the moorland ponies with their barrel bodies and long fetlocks. But it was to the torso and especially the head of the chimpanzee issuing from the shoulders of the pony that the eyes were drawn. Its body had been shorn of all hair, showing its impressive, sinewy musculature to great effect. Onto its forehead had been grafted 2 small goat horns, and these somehow shifted the whole creature towards the demonic. But for some unexpressed reason, it was the chimpanzee's close resemblance to a human that made Robbie freeze in fear. Even the expression on the ape's face was at once haughty, aggressive, defiant, pathetic, and chilling. For an instant, Robbie believed Gabriel Sage had discovered these dead specimens of legendary beasts. Then he recalled his soon-to-be stepfather's boasts about creating a mythological heritage and, of course, he understood that Sage had a talent for manipulating the bodies of dead animals. Robbie was so bewitched by the beasts that Gabriel Sage and his accomplice almost ran him over when they returned. They brought with them a hefty coffin-shaped box that was placed beside the table with a weighty thud. "This load is as nothing, I can tell you," said Nostrils in a clipped tone that suggested privilege, maybe even aristocracy, his smugness having returned to its normal equilibrium. "We had the devil's own job getting your Haast's eagle into New Zealand and then lugging it up Mount Owen clandestinely and all that. Had to pretend we were mere meteorologists with some fancy flip that absolutely had to be prevented from exposure to the sun. Almost had to import my own people, of course. Can't trust the natives with a thing like that. News leaks out. Still, tidy sum made all round, eh?" "And the scientific community have bought it? They've authenticated the bird?" asked Gabriel Sage eagerly. Gabriel, you've been working too hard in the museum," Nostrils scolded gently as he examined the unicorn. "It's only plastered over every tabloid, broadsheet, and news channel. Headlines include, 'The Lord of the Flyers,' 'Fresh Find of the Largest Bird of Prey Ever,' 'The Haast's Eagle, Another Epic from Fantasy Islands,' and my own particular favorite, 'Eerie, the Return of the Man-Eater from the Sky.' Gaudy, but refreshing, I think one will agree. As we speak, battalions of enthusiasts are scouring New Zealand's South Island, searching for a living example of our winged imposter. They've bought the Haast's eagle, all right. For now. But that only proves that they want to believe the bird still exists," Gabriel Sage barked back. "I'm still adamant that you should not have rushed me. I wait months, years in one case, to collect the largest examples possible of these different birds and craft them together in the most beautiful union of a Haast's eagle, only to have you rush me at the end to finish it. Never rush me. It won't do. Perfection is not a luxury in my profession. It is an absolute necessity. Any scientist worth his PhD will discover the vulture's beak when they dissect that bird." "My dear fellow," said Nostrils with an amiable pat on the back of his friend. "Firstly, your argument assumes anyone in the world knows of your talent, and that they know where and how to look for the tells. I doubt not that you are perhaps the only person on the planet practicing such a craft in this variant form, and therefore you are the only expert." The comment appealed to Gabriel Sage's vanity, and he seemed to stand taller for several moments. Secondly, if you had read your papers, you would have learned that the body of the bird is the subject of a major cultural dispute between the scientific community and the Maori people. The scientists wish to dissect it. Of course, the Maoris wish to preserve it intact as part of their early Polynesian heritage of the islands. By the time the arguments are settled over the bird, I know I will have squandered my money from it in the casinos of the world. Then they won't have far to hunt for the man who sold them the bird then, will they? But, dear chap, I did not sell them the bird, explained Nostrils. Robbie felt as if the man's smugness was oozing out of every pore of his skin, like a stench that made the air feel close and stifling. I have installed some charming but gullible Kiwi academic to be my stool pigeon, as it were. He is taking all the kudos for now, but he may have to take the fall later. The bird will never be traced back to me, I have also taken the precaution of paying for some protection to ensure my anonymity.
Protection? With criminal lowlifes, you mean? Asked Gabriel Sage scornfully.
Not lowlifes, dear chap, replied Nostrils with an amused air of smugness as he produced a card from his wallet. But people like us, who have chosen a life less orthodox.
Like you, maybe, but not like me, declared Gabriel Sage. I have a purpose beyond the mere mercenary.
Indeed, but for a simple mortal such as myself, I see it as a wise investment, replied Nostrils, offering the card. You might want to consider taking out a policy yourself. I understand that they are a well-connected outfit and international. Many say that they are the organization, better than holiday insurance. They can make people disappear for the best and worst reasons.
Why would I need their help when the only person to connect me with anything nefarious is you? Replied Gabriel Sage, snatching the card away from Nostrils.
Quite so.
This reads like something from a trash spy thriller, snorted the figure behind the mustache. A telephone number and 2 names, the agent and the fortune teller. Spare me. This is a bad joke. You've wasted your money. Better stick to casinos, eh? Wait just a second. You're not the agent, are you? Jeered Gabriel Sage.
Nostrils did not appear to mind being mocked, but took back his card with a serene smile. As soon as Gabriel Sage mentioned the fortune teller, a memory had ignited in Robbie. Hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo. He knew he had heard the title of the fortune teller before, but he was having trouble trying to excavate the recollection from all the other thoughts mingling in his mind. No, dear chap, Nostrils continued. I'll show my face to the world when you give me that unicorn.
I have designs for her, replied Gabriel Sage, all mirth lost in a moment.
Do they include touring the world? Said Nostrils. What child wouldn't rob his parents blind to see a unicorn?
You think they'd believe in a unicorn? Or a centaur? Asked Gabriel Sage.
If you are as good as you claim to be, and I have every faith in your talents, and it cannot be disproved that the animal is anything else but a unicorn, and who can gainsay in when there is no other example of the animal to measure it by? Indeed, yes. Robbie was coming to despise the indulgent smile, the half-raised eyebrows, and the arrogant arch of nostrils. It is enough that the hope in the existence of unicorns is installed in people's minds. Look at the Loch Ness Monster and the Yeti. I rest my case. One must remember that, after all, some sort of creature must have inspired the first sightings and tales of such beasts. Gabriel Sage stared at his creation pensively, but said nothing as he smoothed down his mustache. Make me the body of a great orc, then. Doesn't have to be pristine, and watch ornithologists and zoologists war against each other to acquire it, Nostrils continued. Or a thylacine, yes, a convincing specimen of the Tasmanian tiger. What could we not do with that? The gangly, flamboyant creator of the creatures did not answer. He turned his back on his accomplice in order to exclude any distractions from his thoughts and gazed at the centaur. Robbie watched as Nostril's smugness fell a notch whilst he stroked the unicorn covetously. Oh, but this beauty! I confess it is this lady that enthralls me. And I had such trouble acquiring that narwhal horn for you, too.
The unicorn may have a price, Gabriel Sage declared quietly, without turning around to face Nostrils.
The heady atmosphere of superior smugness spread like a contagion through the room once more. Name it.
I want to work on human specimens.
Before he could stop himself, Robbie found he had uttered most of the word no in a breathless sigh. Both men's heads whipped around in his direction. Not for the first time that night, Robbie forced all his limbs to go rigid and hoped that the people confronting him might not notice the slight boy-shaped distortion in the shadows between the unicorn and the griffin. Keeping his head bowed in order for his face to remain hidden meant that Robbie was unable to see the men directly. He was therefore oblivious to the fact that both Gabriel Sage and Nostrils were staring straight at the spot where he was hidden. But Robbie could not fail to notice when Gabriel Sage's footsteps began to approach him. The immaculate leather shoes strode forward with that brisk, long gait. They were on a direct collision course with Robbie's position. Then the shoes came to a halt, mere inches away from the subtle blur of the coat. Robbie's legs began to ache with the slight stoop he had to adopt to ensure every part of him was hidden beneath the unique material. The absolute stillness of his stance was only adding to the pain. The tension of the situation was almost beyond endurance. Robbie tried to distract himself from the agony by examining Gabriel Sage in detail. He noticed that one of the buttons on the mustard waistcoat possessed a loose thread and had only 3 more fixing loops before it fell off entirely. For the first time, Robbie noticed that the bow tie just inches away from his face was lopsided and drooped towards the left. Robbie saw the fine piano player's fingers on the right hand reach up out of view and guessed that Gabriel Sage was twirling the curled tip of one end of his mustache in thought. He had never been this physically close to his soon-to-be stepfather for so long, and hoped never to be again. An age seemed to pass before Gabriel Sage span on his heels and abruptly opened the door to the room. In his peripheral vision, Robbie could see the tips of the mustache swing from one side of the museum to the other, scanning the room thoroughly. Then they stopped as Gabriel Sage's eyes locked onto Robbie's door for what might have been a minute. Satisfied that there was no spy lurking nearby, the flamboyant figure closed the door gently.
"Night noises,"
explained Gabriel Sage.
"Probably the timbers contracting with the cold. Such things happen at night, especially in old buildings. A fellow gets familiar with it."
Nostrils accepted the explanation. "I want to understand this clearly," he said slowly without any trace of smugness. "You want to work on people?"
"Oh, yes. It's vital to my greater design."
Sage turned towards Nostrils, leaning in towards his companion, daring him to be part of the conspiracy.
"My ambition is no less than to stun the world and profoundly unsettle it."
Nostrils considered the proposition for a moment. "Let me unearth a couple of unicorns in Central Asia, one in a damaged condition and this beauty, and I may be able to acquire a few Homo sapiens for you. You'll have to improve the security on this place, though. I don't care for the ramshackle nature of your operation. You might easily be exposed, especially now that your new family is here."
"They are not family yet."
"She irritates you?"
"Frequently."
"And the boy?" Gabriel Sage pondered the question as he followed Nostrils towards the door.
"In all honesty, the boy has been a bit of a find. It may take time, but I feel I may well have found my apprentice at last."
The conversation had been so engrossing and stupefying that Robbie only realized that the men were leaving when it was too late. The light in the room went out and the door locked, leaving Robbie trapped, alone, with the terrible specimens. He was unable to escape or call out for aid. At first, it was pitch black in the room. Soon Robbie felt he could sense the presence of the creatures around him, and they were beginning to take on the character of monsters. As his eyes began to adjust to the lack of light, the figures slowly, imperceptibly started to loom out of the darkness. With a faltering hand, Robbie reached out for the unicorn. It came from a need to know he was there, in that room, with his eyes open and not ensnared in a dream. He also wanted to confirm that the beasts were not about to blink, shift their heads and decide to stalk forward to take a closer look at the human boy amongst them. But the unicorn did not flinch, but allowed Robbie to feel the base of the horn where it joined the skull of the horse. Certainly, through the sense of touch, it appeared as if the two bones had grown and fused together quite naturally over the animal's lifetime. The griffin, too, was not some shoddy, stitched-together version of the beast that gave up its secrets under close scrutiny. Robbie raised some of the feathers at the point where the lion and the eagle's body were united, but he could feel no join. They seamlessly melded into one animal. Granted, the head might have looked a little small in proportion with the lion's torso, and it was quite possible that the wings, though vast, were still too little to carry the bulk of the beast, but in every other detail, it was perfection. Robbie could not bring himself to even glance in the direction of the other two creatures. He huddled in the furthest corner away from the Minotaur and Centaur, the darkness pressing all around. Then he pulled the hood down over his face and turned on the coat's warmth function. Gabriel Sage was not just an eccentric engaged in a bizarre occupation. Robbie understood that now. He was also a callous and twisted crook who cared for nothing beyond his calling. Insult seemed inadequate. Somehow Robbie doubted any language could provide the correct word for what he felt towards the man. That night, Robbie decided he had to leave this place with his mother and head back to Bristol. Back home to Grandma and Ivor. The thought occupied his mind and comforted his spirit. Throughout the night, his head would droop with weariness, but then Robbie would nod back into consciousness to check that the hooves on the far side of the room had not become restless and inched closer in his direction. Chapter 7. Runaway. Sleep did come to Robbie, but he found it impossible to distinguish where the threshold lay between conscious thought and dreams. Reality and imagination melded into one another, neither offering true rest.
"Robert? Where are you? Robert?"
The muffled voice dragged Robbie out of his stupor. With no external light able to penetrate the heavy fabric blinds fixed over the windows, there was nothing to indicate whether it was day or night.
"Robert, where the devil are you, boy? Confounded you!"
Gabriel Sage's voice called out again from behind the thick door. Glancing down at his watch, Robbie realized that the time was about 8 o'clock in the morning, which meant that Sage had probably been searching for him for close to half an hour. Grogginess made Robbie slow-witted. Only after the key turned in the lock and the door began to open did he remember that the warmth function on the coat was on rather than the invisibility mode. He could be seen. Gabriel Sage gasped.
"Robert, how?"
But Robbie did not allow him to finish his question, shouldering past Gabriel Sage in his haste to rush upstairs to see his mother.
"No, Robert, come back."
It had taken Ellie Ash 10 minutes to overcome her bed-bound inertia and haul herself to the bathroom to wash her face and brush her teeth when Robbie barged in. "Morning, darling," sighed Ellie Ash. Even breathing felt like an effort to her. "You look awful. Didn't sleep well?" Robbie was still squinting in the bright light of day and took on the appearance of a dishevelled vampire with a savage migraine. "Mum, you have to listen to me," declared Robbie. "We have to leave, now." "Why? Is there a fire? The builders haven't done something stupid, have they? One of them had the cheek to come poking about up here the other day, pretending to see if there was anything I wanted." His mother was shattered, Robbie could tell from the toneless quality of her voice, but his news was not something that could wait. "No, Mum, it's nothing to do with the builders. We have to leave Gabriel Sage now." "No, Robbie, don't start this again." Her frown contracted into an expression of pain. "You and he have been getting on so well. Gabe's very impressed with you. I've been hearing nothing but good things." "Mum, please understand that this is beyond me not liking the guy. I've been locked up in his workshop all night with these creatures. Monsters, Mum. Twisted things." "Gabe locked you in his workshop?" "No, not deliberately." "What were you doing in there then?"
"He must have smuggled himself in," replied the gangly figure, smoothing down his mustache.
Robbie shied away from the presence that had quietly installed itself in the doorway. Beneath the mustache, Gabriel seemed to display an expression of calm concern for Robbie, completely untroubled by any revelations that might be divulged. "Is that true?" Ellie asked her son. "Did you sneak into the workshop without Gabe's permission?" "Yes, but that's not the point. Your husband, your fiancé, is part of a criminal network, producing extinct animals to fool everyone, even experts, and who knows what else he is doing." Robbie hoped the disclosure might cause his mother some concern, but her tired expression only looked wearier than ever. Robbie decided to play his trump card. "And now he wants to work on humans. He wants to use dead people in the same way he poses his rabbits and his mice and his foxes in the museum." "People, Mum. We have to get out of here, away from him. It's not too late. Grandma will take us back." While Robbie had been talking, Ellie Ash had finished brushing her teeth and had begun to wash her face and hands. All this was done without really removing her eyes from Gabriel Sage. "Gabe?" she asked eventually.
"Robert managed to slip into the workshop where I am working on some apes at the moment. I didn't realize he was inside and accidentally locked him in overnight. Poor chap must have been scared witless by the specimens, mistook them for human. I'm sorry, Robbie, but you must admit that you did creep in without my knowledge, and you know you shouldn't have been in there."
The explanation Gabriel Sage offered seemed so calm, so rational, that Robbie could see how suspect and paranoid his version of events must seem to his mother. "What about your friend? What about all that illegal malarkey?" countered Robbie.
"Yes, that is somewhat embarrassing," Gabriel Sage grimaced penitently. "But to help ends meet in the museum, I sometimes do taxidermic requests for clients. In addition to this, to gain the more rare specimens for the collection, I have to get involved with minor underworld elements. Both these tasks can stray into the wrong side of legal, acquiring animals that are protected species and that sort of thing, but I hardly rank as a criminal mastermind, I think you'll agree. After all, who am I harming? Here I stand before you, Ellie, with all my secrets exposed. Can you forgive me?" A wave of relief broke over Ellie Ash's face, and she began to dab at the water droplets on her face and hands with a towel. Tears of frustration began to well up in Robbie's eyes. "No, Mum, that wasn't how it happened. Robert, stop it. Just stop it." Her features sank into genuine distress. "This is so unfair of you to be doing to me when I am in this state." Gabriel Sage glided to her side to comfort the mother of his unborn child as she fell into sobs. "No, Mum, what I've said is all true, I promise you. Enough! Stop it!" yelled his mother. "Can't you just stop it? Won't you give the poor man a chance, Robert? Does Gabe have to walk over broken glass for you to like him? He's your father now." "Don't say that." "Yes, he is your father now. Your other one died and left us." Robbie stepped back, bewildered. How could this have gone so badly for him? He was wielding the truth, wasn't that enough? He had witnessed Gabriel Sage demand unspeakable things, and yet it was he, Robbie, who was in the wrong. How had he become the villain in the whole episode? Gabriel Sage was staring directly at Robbie,
still wearing his expression of calm concern, not a hint of anything negative or triumphant in his eyes.
"Robbie," he said softly, "once again, I am sorry for frightening you. Tell you what, we won't do any work today. Go and amuse yourself."
Amusing himself was the last reaction Robbie was contemplating. A cold, dingy hovel, sapped of all warmth or comfort, was how Robbie usually considered the large stone cupboard that passed for his room. But now he welcomed the thick, cold stone walls and the hefty door for being solid barriers to prevent his emotions from erupting. Robbie barricaded himself in his cell by hurling the ramshackle bed against the door and tossing the tea chest on top of it. Then he slid down the wall and hugged his knees, waiting for the fuming frustration to subside. Robbie was not aware of having felt tired, but at some point around 5 o'clock that evening, Gabriel Sage barged his way into Robbie's room and dropped a portion of fish and chips on his soon-to-be stepson's sleeping head. The stone floor seemed to have leached all the warmth from Robbie, including the passion he had felt earlier, so it was with a pensioner's pace that he lugged himself into a standing position and began to devour the meal.
"I warned you about trying to play your mother against me, did I not?"
Robbie did not answer, preferring to shove fish and chips into his mouth.
"Robert!"
"I'm sorry," replied Robbie, deliberately spraying his stepfather with deep-fried potato and battered fish. "Did you say something?" Gabriel Sage moved up close to his stepchild, grabbed him by the throat, and hauled him against the wall. Instantly, Robbie's latent reflexes responded. He grabbed the slack section of skin deep between the thumb and index finger on his stepfather's hand and squeezed. There was no disguising the pain and shock on Gabriel Sage's face as he stepped back, clutching his aching hand. Had anger not been swelling within him, Robbie might have worn a similar expression of shock, for he had no idea where he had ever learned that defensive move.
"Do you think I have to fight you to best you, Robert? Is that what you think?" hissed Gabriel Sage. "Should I ever be tempted, I have the power to bestow upon someone the most awful of fates. I can manipulate the bodies of the dead to render them unrecognizable, perhaps even to their own mothers. I could quite easily attach, just as an example, you, say, to the hindquarters of a goat, maybe graft some horns onto your head, claim you are some spawn of the woodland god Pan. Imagine being merely part of a hybrid mythical creature at which school children would gawp and stare in awe. What exhibits they might make! And only a forensics team could discover the truth. I am that gifted."
"There is no name for what you are," whispered Robbie.
"On that point we are in agreement, Robert. Genius creates its own vocabulary. Tonight will be the first and only time I will experience insolence from you if you want to remain part of this family. If you don't, the door is over there." Gabriel extended an arm towards the front door of the museum. "If you stay, you take your chances."
Robbie said not another word, but watched impassively as his stepfather took away the light stand on the floor by way of punishment. "Tell me something," said Robbie, before the wedge of light from the open door left him completely in the dark. "Do you love Mum?"
"What do you think?"
"That's no answer."
"It's the only one you're getting,"
came the reply. "One more thing," said Robbie. "If I behave, am I just to be locked in here and treated as your slave?" Gabriel Sage smirked as he smoothed down his moustache. "What else are you good for?" The door was closed, plunging the room into darkness. Robbie decided to take Gabriel Sage up on his offer and leave. He was worried about his mother, of course, but it seemed that Gabriel Sage would look after her. He had seen evidence of it that afternoon, and she was bearing his child after all. Added to this was the fact that Ellie Ash did not appear to be on Robbie's side, and he found it hard to forgive her for referring to Gabriel Sage as his father, even if she was ill. Using the light from the watch his grandma had given him, Robbie waited until Gabriel Sage went upstairs to check on his sick fiancée. In the early evening, Robbie crept out of his bedroom, rushed through the museum and let himself out the front door. Glimpses of the nightmarish exhibits troubled him not at all. Only the inhabitants in the workshop held sway over the darker spectrum of his imagination. Trailing furrows of cloud careered across the sky on the back of a fierce, chill wind. Circling everything in a tight horizon were the low, hunched silhouettes of the moors. To the left, the lights in the village below twinkled and shimmered as if Chuffing Sodmore was some enchanted illusion. It appeared to Robbie that the lamppost beside the statue in the centre of the square only emphasized the darkness of the places its rays could not reach. As if reading his thoughts, a shadow beneath the statue of the soldier shifted slightly. Robbie suddenly found he had a pulse in the back of his throat. Reassuring himself that it was the same girl he had seen in exactly the same location only a few days before, Robbie took a few moments to calm himself, hoping she had not seen his alarm, then strode towards her. "Have you really not got anything better to do than stare at this place all evening?" asked Robbie in a hushed tone as he approached her. He did not want his voice to carry to Sage's ears. The girl languidly turned her dark eyes down to the quiet village, empty of all life and movement. She blinked at it a couple of times, and then turned back to Robbie. "No." "I know this used to be your place, but you can save your resentment for Sage from now on because I'm out of here," Robbie declared. Even in the shadows, Robbie could see the girl's eyebrows pitch into an inquiry. It was the first expression she had ever given Robbie that was not outright contempt. "You're leaving?" "Yep." Robbie glanced back at the cottage. Can't stand him anymore. A strand of hair whipped across the girl's cheek. She guided it back behind her ear. Robbie realized that she was not unattractive, but clearly she made no attempt to enhance her looks or even cared what others made of her. "Where are you intending to go?" Robbie eyed her in a would you tell on me kind of way, but guessed this girl hated Gabriel Sage more than himself. "Bristol." "You know people in Bristol?" "My grandmother." The girl considered the reply and then stood up. "I'd offer to run away with you, but you'll be back here soon." "What? I don't even know your name other than Lovecraft," Robbie was indignant. "And you don't know I'll be back." "Isla Lovecraft," she replied, and as she walked away she glanced behind her. "And you'll be back." Robbie watched her until she was out of sight. Then he pulled up the hood of his coat and silently thanked his grandma for the garment which, at least, offered him some protection from the elements. Pressing the second button within the coat sleeve, Robbie allowed the warmth to seep through the coat before he set out across the moors, heading for the postal train bound for Bristol. A short way into his trek across the low hills, Robbie experienced a moment of panic as he stumbled into a group of life forms that stomped and snorted at him. After he allowed himself a moment to calm down, he realized that they were a small herd of wild ponies. Then Robbie thought himself lost. He decided to head for Dark Tor, the highest peak around, and, once he gained the summit, he could make out the lights blazing from the railway station no more than a mile away. A train horn sounded some distance off, and Robbie realized the race was on to catch his only passage back to Bristol. Running headlong down a moor with no illumination whatsoever was thrilling but dangerous work. More than once, Robbie's foot caught in some dip and he was sent sprawling. But no dirt seemed to attach to the amazing coat, and his boots appeared to have extra strengthening and support to stop him from breaking bone or pulling muscle. 400 yards to go, and he could see the train now. Pelting down from the moors, Robbie vaulted over a small fence, past a collection of metal trolleys, heavy-duty railway tools and the like, up the ramp to the platform just as the train rumbled into the station. He pressed the third button on his coat sleeve and instantly became a face bobbing down the platform, with a haze of night where his body should have been. The train slowed down to a running pace. A little way ahead of him, Robbie heard a large door slide back from a carriage with no windows. Then a young man in a postal uniform leant out of the train and hollered down the platform at the disgruntled station master emerging from his booth.
"Oi, how are you then, laugh a minute? You know it's only your beaming smile and that infectious laughter of yours that keeps me in this job." "Don't feel the need to be civil to fools and errand boy," the station master's voice faltered. He froze in fear, the sack of mail dangling from his outstretched arm. The old railway worker had finally caught sight of the apparition, a boy without a body running down the platform towards him. "Can't even be bothered to finish your insults now," said the young postal worker on the train as he snatched the bag of mail. "You know how to hurt a fellow's feelings, don't ya? You, sir, are a real sweetheart." The train began to pick up speed. The young postal worker tried to slam the door of the carriage shut, only to receive the shock of his life. A boy's face hovered just outside the door. Then it sprung towards the train, and there was a dull thud as two disembodied feet landed upon the floor of the carriage. The young postal worker backed away in horror, Robbie staring at him for a few moments, unsure about how to conduct himself. Please, the postal worker began to whimper and cross himself. "Whatever I've done, I'm sorry for it. Don't haunt me or drive me mad, please. I'm so sorry." He paused for a moment, waiting for some response from the wraith. Robbie decided to say not a word, but let the effect of his phantom-like form buy him free passage to Bristol. He did feel sorry for frightening the postal worker, but what words of comfort or reassurance could he offer without humiliating the man? Also, by speaking, Robbie thought he might break the spell his coat was having and get himself thrown off the train. The young man began to jabber again. "You're not some omen, are you? You're not here because my little Lily's going to die. Please let her live. I love her more than life. Please, tell me to throw myself from the train and I'll do it, but please let her live. She will live, won't she?" Robbie nodded slowly. He did not know what to say, but he certainly did not want anyone to suffer because of him. And so it came to be that Robbie stood quietly in the corner of the carriage, his coat wrapped around him, locked in a stare with the terrified man opposite throughout the entire journey. Once they had reached Bristol, Robbie made a quick exit past the fear-frozen postal worker and off the train. He managed to slip out of the station unseen and, after pressing the first button on the sleeve, his coat returned to a normal look. Using some of the very pocket money she had given him, Robbie caught a taxi to his grandma's lavish house near Brunel's Bridge in Clifton, arriving at her address a little after 9 o'clock. A small collection of large, expensive cars were already in the substantial driveway when 4 more vehicles pulled up directly outside Gwen Carroll's house, and a group of intimidating men and women got out of them, casting glances in all directions. A beautifully dressed, silver-haired woman Robbie knew as Aunt Wanda, an old friend of Grandma's, stepped out of the middle car, and her entourage instantly clustered around her as they made their way to the door of the house. Robbie did not call out to her as he realized he was about to interrupt one of Grandma's deadly serious bridge and gin evenings. All too aware that to be caught back in the house by his friend and Grandma's loyal companion, practically adopted son, Ivor Noon, would almost certainly result in being driven back to Chuffing Sodmore that night, Robbie put his coat back onto its ghostly setting and slipped stealthily around the back of the large, elegant building. Most of the windows at the rear of Grandma's beautiful property were secure,
but Robbie knew about the loose catch on the window of his room on the first floor that just needed a little persuasion to open. Shinning up the drainpipe, he clambered onto a ledge and gently rattled the window until enough of a gap appeared that he could ease a small key through to the lock and ease back the catch. He squeezed himself through the window, but stopped himself from heading out into the upstairs corridor. Hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo. The words burst like fireworks in his mind. More than that, they were not just visual. He almost felt the words had texture. Hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo. Instinctively, Robbie headed for the beautiful wooden desk in the bedroom. Hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo. What could the words possibly mean? Without understanding why he was doing it, Robbie began to feel the contours and edges of the desk in the manner of a blind person, but there seemed to be no clue as to the sense of the words there either. Yet something drove him to keep investigating with his fingers, and there, along a hidden edge beneath the desk, he could feel the roughly carved letters. Robbie crouched down and used the light from his watch to read them. They had clearly been gouged out in a hurry, and at distinctively different times, but, unmistakably, there were the words hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo, kin. Kin. A flare of familiarity lit up his consciousness for a second, but illuminated nothing about which Robbie could make sense. There was another mark beside the N of kin, but it was impossible to decipher. However, it suggested the word was longer and had been left unfinished. Someone had clearly carved these messages for Robbie and positioned them in a place that was hidden. A part of Robbie was convinced that these words were carved by himself, but why would he keep them hidden from his grandmother and Ivor? They were the people he trusted most in the world. Yet, an insistent part of his mind was telling Robbie that this sequence of words was more than important. It was vital, and he had to remember it. He traced the letters with his fingers over and over again, hoping beyond all hope that he could recall their significance and why kin sounded both right and wrong. Something was missing, and his mind seemed desperate to solve or resolve it. But it was like catching sudden movement that darts in the peripheral vision or musical notes that flitter on the edge of consciousness but just cannot be placed. Robbie gave up deciphering the meaning of these words for the moment and crept out into the upstairs corridor. He peered over the banisters leading downwards, but could only make out a lot of movement and voices in a language he did not know. Turning towards the stairs, Robbie collided with some solid object and fell to the landing on his backside. On the stairs were two large military boots, and, well over 6 feet above them, a hovering head glared down at him. There was nothing to indicate a body in between, but a warping of the light. Robbie gasped as he recognized the huge, invisible man was wearing a garment made from the same material as his own coat. He gasped again on realizing that about halfway down between the boots and face was a hand with a gun pointed directly at his head. Chapter 8. An Unequal Duel. The near-invisible man on the stairs snarled something at Robbie in a gruff language that felt like being savaged with words. A muscular frame about 6.5 feet tall shimmered into view, the material creasing and folding over the man's immense arms and torso suggested hefty brutality straining to be unleashed. Even without the gun pointing at his head, Robbie would have found himself intimidated by this powerful specimen. Crouching down on the stairs, the huge man allowed the muzzle of his gun to nuzzle beneath Robbie's chin. After a moment's thought, the man tapped Robbie's jawbone with the pistol, as if in gentle rebuke, then bellowed in his face in the language that seemed to be mostly consonants and few vowels. "Please," Robbie said in hushed tones as he tried to catch his breath. I don't understand." "English," said the man, half a question, half a declaration. Robbie nodded. There was a great commotion in the hallway beneath, followed by people firing questions upstairs in the tongue Robbie had no hope of understanding. The barking, toing and froing of the inquiries and the answers the huge man provided sounded like rifle reports in the house. After a moment's dialogue with the unseen people below, Robbie's captor hauled him up off the stairs with one arm and thudded downstairs 2 steps for each stride. Nothing could have prepared Robbie for the reception that greeted him in the hallway. Close to a dozen men and women of various extractions were crowded at the foot of the staircase, with another handful scattered at different heights upon the stairs. Every one of them had guns trained upon him. "Vasily, we know him." Robbie knew the voice that came from deep within the crowd of sinew and firearms, and all hope within him latched onto it. "He's the fortune-teller's grandchild." He was staring at a throng of people in his grandmother's hallway. The people parted without taking their aim from Robbie, allowing Ivor Noon to coast forward, bringing his wheelchair to a halt at the foot of the staircase. "Evening, Robbie," Ivor smiled grimly. "As you might have guessed by now, we weren't really expecting you." "You okay, Ivor?" asked a broad, stubbly-faced man some years older than his surrounding colleagues. The precise and complex way the R trilled off his tongue marked him down as someone who came from Eastern Europe or beyond. "He's okay, Vasily. It's Robert," replied Ivor. "You have my word." "He's enough for Vasily. You okay with me? Big apologies, Robert. Would not have recognized you." The older man uttered a sharp sound, and all the guns in the room drooped downwards. In his state of heightened awareness, Robbie noticed within less than a second that the older man, Vasily, not only possessed a bushy moustache that draped over his top lip, therefore hiding his mouth, but had also had his nose broken in several places at some point in the past. Robbie felt he vaguely recognized the man. "Sergei," called out Vasily to the colossus on the stairs holding Robbie. Vasily jerked his head to one side as a signal to put the boy down, but the giant, Sergei, did not obey. A brief and heated dialogue ensued between Vasily and Sergei, which needed no translation. At the end of it, Robbie was still dangling from an immense arm. "Moronic, mutinous, Mongolian shepherd, Ivor," complained Vasily. "Mongolians crazy people. They can be cruel like devils, they always bloody-minded like Mongol horse, and they always bloody stupid like the sheep. Sorry, Ivor." "You are sure of this boy, crippled man?" asked Sergei, ignoring Vasily's remarks and holding up Robbie with as much effort as if he was showing them a kitten he had found. "In some countries I have operated in, young children are used as assassins. You may be sure of him, yes, but we have the scientists to protect. You are sure for all of us." Vasily unleashed a torrent of abuse at the Mongolian for the insult towards Ivor, but the man in the wheelchair reacted hardly at all. "I've given my word," Ivor replied. "I vouch for him." Sergei considered this response for a moment, and then, as if bored, he tossed his hostage down at the crowd in the hallway. Vasily caught Robbie and placed him on his feet. The strapping Mongolian and his Russian boss instantly began to squabble, mauling each other with syllables so vicious they had to be spat out like phlegm. Robbie edged his way to the side of the wheelchair and to the sanctuary offered by the only person in the room he knew. A reassuring hand was placed on Robbie's shoulders. "I'm sure you have many questions, Robbie, and you'll be wanting answers," whispered Ivor. "Can I ask you to wait until I inform your grandmother of your arrival?" "I can wait, Ivor," Robbie replied. Just don't leave me alone with these... Who are these people? Are they people? Patience, Robbie. Besides, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. Robbie did as he was told. If he were honest with himself, Robbie would have to admit that his brain was overwhelmed by the whole experience, and he was not at all sure it could cope with any explanation, however reasonable. For the moment, he contented himself with being free of the huge Mongolian's grip and out of the gun sights of that fierce body of people. As he followed Ivor down the hallway, through a living room towards the kitchen, Robbie kept a firm grip on his friend's wheelchair and occasionally sneaked a glance backwards to check that Sergei was not about to change his mind. Gwen Carroll had every detail of her house finished to an ultimate standard of excellence, although the building wore it well and did not draw too much attention to the riches it contained. It was a unique house that seemed to have borrowed its varied style by pilfering items and fixtures from all over the world, and yet it still possessed a panache that was rare anywhere. The owners of the heavy boots clomping along the hallway had no inkling that they were treading upon reclaimed oak floorboards that used to grace a ballroom upon which the last Tsar of Russia and his daughters had danced. They simply had no idea they were opening the same heavy rivet-studded door behind which Cardinal Richelieu had plotted and commanded the deaths of dozens of men, or that the worn fireplace they passed in the living room, which had been dismantled in Venice and reassembled here, had once thrown out firelight by which Lord Byron had written his poetry. "I am a magpie, Robbie. Theft is my trade," Grandma Gwen had once told her grandson. He did not understand it then, and he did not understand it now. The only compromise Gwen Carroll had made to the look of her house was in the discreet ramps and hidden lifts, allowing Ivor easy access to the entire building. More sinister-looking people awaited them in the large kitchen, standing stiffly around the place in little huddles. All of them showed mild surprise at Robbie's entrance. Some raised an eyebrow, others allowed their hands to stray from one side of their jackets as if to check their wallets. A few Mediterranean men peered over the top of their sunglasses at the newcomer. Somehow these people had made the coziest room in the house with its Argus stove beneath the large brick archway, its exposed timber-beamed roof and vast wooden table fashioned from an old barn door, somehow they had made it feel menacing and out of place. Robbie heard the group from the hallway pile into the room, still bickering, as Ivor glided towards a slender West Indian woman leaning on the Aga cooker. "Cleo, would you do me the favour of informing Mrs. Carroll that her grandson has joined us here tonight?" asked Ivor. The woman, called Cleo, paused in mid-chew of her gum. "Be the devil's own ransom to pay if anyone boarded them. I know we were forbidden from going in, but it would be best if she knew about his presence here." "And why don't you do this thing? You want to see Cleo get her boot chewed by the ladies? Good sport, huh?" Ivor smiled indulgently. "The scientist muscle gave the boy a fright. He only really knows me. He doesn't want to be left alone, please." Cleo's eyes lazily drifted up and down Robbie. "Sure," she replied. "But Ivor, you make sure they cremate me. Don't want no burial." The West Indian woman disappeared through a door at the back of the kitchen, heading down the corridor to a room Robbie knew as his grandma's study. Sergei, the giant on the stairs, swaggered past. "Sorry if Sergei scared you, little man. I thought you might be his backup bodyguard," laughed Sergei as he pointed at Ivor. No one else in the room even smiled. "Is that what you are, all of you? Bodyguards?" "Da, him too, they say," replied Sergei, still pointing at Ivor. "This lone cripple guards the fortune teller. It is madness, no?" Ivor grimaced as if Robbie had just found out that he had broken a promise. "Tell me," continued Sergei, "how can that guard anything?" Robbie stared at his friend, a frown and a slight squinting of the eyes being the only indication of the turmoil in his mind. Ivor returned the stare, his head slightly bowed, a guilty grimace unable to distract the search in his eyes that hoped their friendship had not founded on this new revelation. Up until 10 minutes ago, Robbie had always said that Ivor was the first and only adult who always treated him as an equal. Robbie was always grateful to Ivor for that small courtesy. But now, ferocious invaders had swamped his grandma's house, the place in which Robbie felt most at home, and bizarre allegations had been made against his oldest friend that shook the foundations of the mutual trust they shared. How could Ivor be anyone's bodyguard? Robbie would surely have known. Anyway, Ivor was wheelchair-bound. Although he had forced the Cairns Nash clan to back down in the hospital, Ivor was a bodyguard. It was the only explanation that strayed anywhere near making sense. Robbie suddenly became aware that all the other people in the room were backing up against the walls, away from the group containing Ivor, Sergei, Vasily, and himself. The hushed tension in the kitchen foretold that something was about to erupt. Vasily sensed this too and tried to defuse the situation.
"Forgive the Mongolian's sheep-brains, Ivor. He foolish, he knew, he know nothing."
"Why do you scare these people so, cripple man?" said Sergei, glancing at his colleagues who had shifted as far away from him as possible without actually leaving the room. "Must be my physical stature," Ivor replied, beaming back at the Mongolian.
"Ivor and the fortune teller command big respect both,"
Vasily growled at Sergei, but even he was now backing away from the two men. "I could demonstrate some of my credentials to be a bodyguard if you wish," said Ivor.
"Not necessity, Ivor,"
pleaded Vasily, holding up a pacifying hand.
"What, on the boy?" asked Sergei, ignoring his boss.
"No, you." Sergei roared with laughter. It rang out strange and ominous in a room full of silent people.
You challenge me?"
"You're a new recruit, aren't you?" asked Ivor. The huge Mongolian stopped laughing in an instant. He slipped off his coat to reveal a body so swollen with muscle that it looked as if it had been sculpted from granite. The white t-shirt seemed a second skin molded to the contours of the bulk it had contained. Robbie noticed that Ivor did not allow his attention to be drawn from Sergei's face for one moment.
"You have gun in chair?"
said the Mongolian suspiciously.
"I have heard it is, as British say, tooled up. Perhaps this is source of your influence with these people."
"No gun, no chair," Ivor replied, hopping out of his wheelchair and heaving himself adeptly onto the kitchen table by the use of his hands. "Step back, Robbie." Slowly, with incomprehension dulling his response, Robbie did as he was told. To Robbie's eyes, Ivor's movements were so swift, fluid, and nimble they seemed unnerving, as if he represented a different species of man born to move propelled by his arms alone. Ivor perched on his hands at the edge of the table, the tiny stumps of his legs drawn back and out of the way, as he waited for the Mongolian's onslaught.
"You should know, cripple man, that this is not personal," explained Sergei. "I will not damage you badly."
"That is kind of you," replied Ivor. The Mongolian snorted at the bodyguards around him and moved towards his opponent slowly. There had to be some reason why all his contemporaries held this Englishman in such high esteem. At about 4 feet from Ivor, Sergei stopped, then slowly extended his right hand towards his opponent's head. Ivor made a slight sideways shuffling movement, allowing a single arm to take the entire weight and balance of his form. Then his other arm shot out to swipe at the Mongolian's hand. But Sergei had pulled back, smiling. He was merely testing Ivor. In the next instant, the contest escalated at a rapid and ferocious rate. The Mongolian made a lunging grasp at Ivor, but the Englishman shifted his weight to swivel out of his way. Swapping hands at an astonishing speed, Ivor used his left hand as a pivot, freeing the fingers on his right, two of which darted into specific points at the back of Sergei's trunk of a neck. The Mongolian let out a howl of pain and anger as he sprawled across the kitchen table. Then he made a blind swipe behind him. But Ivor had swung his torso up out of the way like a gymnast on a pommel horse. First his left, then his right arm were raised clear of the fist. Before his right hand had even landed, Ivor had bent his left arm so his body fell forward in the same posture as the Mongolian. For a nanosecond, both men regarded each other in a press-up position. Then, Ivor's right hand landed on the back of Sergei's t-shirt and heaved him back onto his feet. But the Mongolian's blind backward swing now came forward in a direct punch. It made no difference. The disabled Englishman was already rotating himself forward within the arc of his adversary's blow. A muscular arm of frightening proportions brushed Ivor's back, but the actual force of the Mongolian's blow met nothing but air. Ivor marshaled the momentum of his own spin to land an open-handed strike on Sergei's forehead. The shove sent the Mongolian reeling back across the room, slamming him into his colleagues. Once again, Robbie was absolutely astonished at the actions of his friend. Even he could see that the Mongolian was relying on primitive power, which was clearly no match for Ivor's unique fashion of anticipation, balance, agility, and strength. There was no superior look of triumph on Ivor's face, however, just a blank expression of calm focus. Calm focus was far from Sergei's state of mind. Humiliation and rage drove him forward. Planting a hefty boot on the kitchen tiles, he aimed a kick at his tormentor's head. Ivor swayed his shoulder and head out of the line of the kick, seemingly to casually regard the state of the size 15 boot as it was thrust past his eyesight. A punch came in swiftly. Ivor dodged it. The fist transformed into a flat-handed martial arts swipe. Ivor parried it with his left hand, then guided the following strike away from his body. Sergei's blows began raining in on Ivor at a frightening rate. The Mongolian was clearly skilled in close combat, yet, through a combination of body movement and use of a single defensive hand, not one of the attacks made contact with Ivor. The two men were mere inches from each other's faces now. Sergei brought back his head to land a headbutt. Ivor immediately rammed his own skull forward under his opponent's chin. For a moment, the Mongolian was helpless, with his head tilted back at an extreme angle. Before Sergei had a chance to grab his adversary in a bear hug, Ivor employed a gentle rocking motion to transfer his weight from one hand to another. Then, a fist shot forward into the middle of the Mongolian's chest, snapping back almost as soon as it had connected. Sergei stumbled backwards, a look of bewilderment set upon his face. He brought his hands towards his chest as if in prayer, then his knees buckled and he collapsed upon the floor tiles in the kitchen. Robbie had watched the fight with slack-jawed amazement and, as if to confirm what he was witnessing, he cast his gaze over the others around him. Most of them were watching the contest with professional interest. Although Vasily was shaking his head ruefully and, over in the corner, a smartly dressed Asian bodyguard was trying to rustle up some interests in bets on the fight. His fingers flashed up and down. He was offering huge odds on the Mongolian to win, but no one was interested. In the middle of the kitchen floor, clutching his solar plexus, Sergei took shallow, painful gasps of breath. He glared at Ivor warily, not daring to glance at his colleagues. "Stay down, Sergei, please," implored Ivor. There was no venom or pleading in his voice, only the gentle reproach similar to that of a disappointed friend. Anything you attempt now will be because of resentment towards me. It is a motive that will hamper your skill. You are good at what you do, I can see that. Vasily does not employ imbeciles. Stay down, please. Sergei held up a hand as if in submission, then rushed headlong at Ivor. The Englishman had been inspecting it and launched himself off the table. An arm cupped around the rear of Sergei's neck and swung the rest of Ivor's body onto the Mongolian's back. Before Sergei had the chance to shake off his tormentor, Ivor carefully placed 3 fingers at different positions upon the muscular neck, with one a little behind an ear. Instantly, Sergei froze. From this position, you could be killed, paralyzed, receive pain like you've never believed, or be given one grim headache, Ivor whispered into his ear. I choose to do the last for your own sense of pride. Call it a scar. You have lost by underestimating your opponent. Say it. The Mongolian's mouth worked up and down silently for a few seconds before a childlike voice not even Sergei knew he possessed uttered, I have lost. Ivor appeared content with the statement and swung himself around Sergei's body to land with incredible dexterity back upon the table. The strapping Mongolian stood stock still in front of his adversary for a second or two, and then slowly felt the sensation return to his fingers. He clenched his fists and then relaxed the fingers on his hand in a slow, beating rhythm for a few moments before rubbing the back of his neck. Sergei peered up at Ivor in confused awe, as he cautiously stepped backwards and in amongst the line of his fellow bodyguards, his head bowed. Hello, Robert. You've grown several inches taller since last we met, said an elegant elderly Chinese lady in perfect English as she slipped into the kitchen from the study with the neat figure of Gwen Carroll following her. I hope the Mongolian has not been bothering you, Ivor. I hope he has not forced me to make an apology to you, or it will go badly for him. Sergei hung his head even lower. No apologies necessary, Madame Sun, replied Ivor. We were just establishing seniority. Such things keep me sharp. Gwen Carroll hurried over to her grandson and embraced him. Robbie hardly returned it. He was still in shock from what he'd just witnessed. Why are you here, sweetie? Ivor, how? Replied Robbie incoherently. Yes, Ivor is impressive, is he not? Grandma said with pride. Your father was too. Dad was a bodyguard? She paused. He was one of the best at what he did. We'll speak more of it another time, sweetie. Grandma, who are they guarding? What is happening? Asked Robbie. Yes, replied Grandma, leading Robbie through the kitchen to the study room at the back of the house. There are 1 or 2 things about me you ought to know. Chapter 9. The Mona Lisa Masterminds. Grandma Gwen and Aunt Sun escorted Robbie along the short, dark corridor, leaving behind the kitchen bristling with bodyguards. Robbie believed he knew his grandma's house inside out. He had lived there a considerable amount of his life, and, as any child might, he had explored the building thoroughly. A feeling that the house did not quite fit itself had always preyed on his mind, however, for some walls seemed thicker than they had to be, and in places the ceilings became low for no obvious reason. None of these observations had troubled him unduly, though. It was a building constructed in another age, after all, with all the architectural quirks that had been in fashion at that time too. Yet, in his mind, the peculiar situation Robbie now found himself in transformed that familiar house entirely, and he began to wonder what other secrets it might be hiding. For instance, he had been in his grandmother's study dozens of times and knew it to be a large but ordinary rectangular room containing a single beautiful table, many books, and no windows. But as they reached the study door, Robbie found himself to be both intrigued and nervous because on that bizarre evening he honestly had no idea what lay beyond it. Two further aunts, Deanne and Wanda, were what lay beyond it, along with the room he knew so well. No strangers, no bodyguards, no weapons. It was almost a disappointment. In stunned bewilderment, Robbie went through the motions of greeting all of the aunts gathered there. They were not his actual aunts, he had none, and even though he saw them rarely, they felt like family and clearly held him in great affection. "Ah, Robbie, me darling, how handsome you've become," cried Aunt Deanne, embarrassing Robbie with an extravagant embrace. "Maybe I take you home to Kingston with me. See if I don't find you a nice Jamaican girl." Of all Robbie's aunts, Aunt Deanne was his favourite. A large woman, festooned in jewellery, with two greying, flame-shaped streaks in her otherwise jet-black hair. Only a person with her rampant good humour could carry off the vividly coloured clothes that draped her ample frame. Deanne Walker possessed a broad smile and a laugh so infectious that to be caught by its blast was to be left helplessly grinning in a daft way. "Robert, my lovely boy," said Aunt Wanda, pinching the flesh on Robbie's cheeks and waggling them in a manner which was meant to convey fondness rather than torture. In an instant her expression switched from delight to severity. "You are naughty to be here," she scolded, grabbing one of Robbie's hands and slapping it with surprising force for a 70-year-old lady. "But I forgive you. I forgive you everything, my lovely." As always, Wanda Silvano was dressed in an immaculate and tasteful fashion. Her hair was the colour of chrome, which brought out the chestnut brown of her flawless eyes beautifully. A neat lady, standing a little over 5 feet tall, Aunt Wanda's personality filled at least as great a space of that of Aunt Deanne's. Aunt Sun took her seat on the other side of the table to study the greetings with distant calm. Robbie had always found her to be as cool, disciplined, and remote as he imagined a head teacher to be, but he sensed she probably displayed as much affection towards him as towards any member of her close family. "I suppose it is best to start with introductions," began Grandma Gwen. "Of course, you know these ladies as aunts, Robbie, but we, all of us, are much more than a group of frail old grandmothers who meet for occasional bouts of bridge. First things first, more tea, gin, or sherry, anyone?" As Robbie waited for his grandmother to pour the tea, he took the opportunity to peer around the room, half expecting to see snipers ranged on top of the bookshelves or spot an assassin disguised as the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. A large flat television screen had been fixed to one wall, and facing it was an excellent reproduction of Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. The rest of the wall space was covered in shelving for the hundreds of books. So paranoid and absorbed was Robbie about what he might have found in his grandmother's study that he very nearly made the mistake of absent-mindedly placing his teacup on the exquisite walnut table. "No, not on the mat, Robbie," Gwen Carroll cried out. In his haste to pull the cup away, Robbie almost spilled tea on the unique piece of furniture. Grandma Gwen scowled at him and then nodded with haughty approval as he put his teacup down upon an occasional table that had been pulled up beside him. The large main table was fashioned from a piece of walnut with a spectacular grain. In dimensions, it was about 8 feet long and 5 feet wide, lacquered to endow it with a deep, luminous sheen. It was to the surface of the table that the eye was drawn, though, with its inlaid map of the world perfectly executed in the Mercator projection. A person could rest their papers or their hands on the table, but Gwen Carroll permitted no one to even write upon it, let alone place their drink down. Aunt Sun sat on the eastern part of the world nearest the Orient. Aunt Deanne sat in the west over the Americas, whilst beside her Aunt Wanda lorded it over Europe and the northern Atlantic. Grandma Gwen and Robbie took the lion's share of the southern hemisphere. "We are busy at the moment, sweetie. You have interrupted us on a night that has taken months of planning. That said, I think it is good for all of us if I surmise what it is we do. Draw the lines in the sand, as it were," proclaimed Gwen Carroll, looking pointedly at the other ladies. "We, Robbie, call ourselves the Mona Lisas. You will not have heard of us. If we are at all good at what we do, hardly anyone on earth will have heard of us. The Mona Lisas are a select body that run or have influence upon most of the world's less lawful organizations, although most of these organizations are not aware of this fact. Tabloid newspapers, sensationalist fiction, and sensational films would call us criminal masterminds." Robbie's expression did not change. His brain was too busy processing the information to bother reacting to it. Take your Aunt Sun. She is a fabulously wealthy Chinese entrepreneur with a say or sway in the criminal organizations of the Orient, as well as influence with Russian gangsters. She also specializes in the development of new technologies and possesses her own laboratories, which are at least 20 years ahead of the rest of the world, 50 or more in some cases. Aunt Sun bowed her head ever so slightly towards Grandma Gwen, and then Robbie. "Your coat and boots come from Madame Sunji's laboratory, along with the weapons and gadgets most of the bodyguards are carrying. She has also managed to keep her mineral mining exploits hidden from the world's nations. She mines asteroids, you see, has done for 5 years, although they have only begun to pay for the last 2. We call her the scientist. Most of the bodyguards out there are hers." Gwen Carroll waited a moment for her grandson to take in what she was saying, but other than a vague glimmer of recognition at the term the scientist, there was no chance of Robbie comprehending any of it, so she carried on. "Then there is Deanne Walker, the merchant." Aunt Deanne blew Robbie a kiss. "Let's just say that there is precious little significant crime that happens in the Americas and, although she won't admit it, a great deal of Europe, without Deanne having had a hand in it some way. She seems to be a filter for the lawless, sifting out the incompetent and excessively violent, to be left with a pure form of crime. Covers her tracks beautifully, too. Wanda claims to see Deanne's presence in criminal activity everywhere, but sometimes Sun and I have not detected her handiwork for weeks." "She means to say years, Robbie, me darling," added Deanne, "but it choke into her throat." "I'll admit to months, Deanne, no more," replied Gwen Carroll. She turned back to Robbie. "If a person wanted the huge sum of money they have just robbed from a corporation or government to hurtle through so many bank accounts that it becomes impossible to trace where it originally came from, they would do well to turn to Deanne. If you wish to steal the new designs and ideas of your competitor, through computer hacking, say, but wanted to appear as innocent as a newborn whilst exploiting this new information, Deanne Walker would put you in touch with the right people, for a fee or a commission, or both. Deanne is one of the most influential people on the planet. But what makes her so extraordinary, unique even, in our line of business, is that Deanne runs her entire empire by virtue of the fact that everyone likes her. Never has a winning smile and irresistible charm paid so well. "Deanne," Aunt Wanda cried out, "take your hands off the Atlantic and stay in America.
Try charming me and I slap your face.
The large West Indian lady slowly raised her fingers one by one from the surface of the map of the world upon the beautiful table. The two greying, flame-shaped streaks in her hair appeared like wispy horns above a huge grin. She winked at Robbie.
You see, Gwen, said Wanda. We all great friends, big hugs, kiss, kiss, and Deanne slowly grabbing over Europe. There will be blood shed in this room this night if I hear she has ambitions for Italia.
And of course, Wanda, you'll be having no ventures in America then, replied Wanda.
We all operate in America. Don't be naive. America is open market.
Well, now, we all have a slice of Europe too, do we not, Soon? I hear your media piracy outfits are doing particularly well on the continent.
Sun Gigi said nothing, but glared at Deanne from the opposite side of the table. Gwen Carroll allowed the silence to settle for a moment.
Not forgetting your Aunt Wanda.
Wanda will introduce herself, Gwen, and be done with it. No more nonsense, declared the fiery Italian. I am Wanda Silvano, and I have big control in European business and influence in I am Wanda Silvano, and have big control in European business and influence in Cosa Nostra, mafia, as you say. They call me the aristocrat because I am a different class to them, Robert.
We call you the aristocrat, Countess Silvano. Gwen Carroll drawled over the title Countess so no one could lose the irony. Because you rely on old money and old forms of acquiring it, as well as adopting heirs. But she does keep parts of the mafia in check, I grant you. There is a fifth member of the group.
Aunt Delphine, said Robbie.
Delphine Dumas, yes, the agent. She is thick with some Eastern Bloc thugs and their networks, but some say that she cannot see past immediate profit. She is only in the organization by dint of the fact that her father was the first person we know about to steal the Mona Lisa. A person has to be invited to join us, but that's our initiation test, you see. Stealing the Mona Lisa. Robbie raised his eyes to the Leonardo da Vinci masterpiece on the wall. Oh, no, Robbie, that's not the original. That one is painted on canvas for a start. The real one is painted on poplar wood. No, the genuine Mona Lisa still hangs in the Louvre in Paris. But I don't understand, said Robbie. It's the audacity of the gesture and the brilliance in the execution of the theft we are looking for, not the picture itself. It says, I am a force in crime to be reckoned with. None of us have taken it for profit. Gwen paused, and Si, Sun, Deanne stared at Wanda for a few moments. Deanne had the painting for just a few seconds. Deanne for several hours. I possessed it for about 20 minutes, whilst Wanda had it for a considerably longer time. All of us returned it, and only once were the French authorities ever aware of what had happened. 3 of the aunts stared at Wanda again. Then how do you know if it's been stolen? Asked Robbie. One of Soon's minute devices on the picture itself gives us all the information we need to authenticate the robbery, replied Soon. And what about you, Grandma? Asked Robbie. Why are you here? The other 3 ladies turned to Gwen, their differences forgotten for a moment. Gwen Carroll seemed surprised by the question and pondered over her answer for a second. I am named the Fortune Teller. Once again, Robbie experienced the lightning flash of recognition, but it was gone just as quickly, like the fleeting trail of a shooting star. Hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo, kin, echoed through his mind again. But his grandmother was still talking, absent-mindedly playing with the black Tektite choker necklace at her throat, and Robbie did not want to miss a word. Apparently I have a gift for predicting which way the wind blows with trends concerning us, continued Gwen Carroll. I am not affiliated to any organization, but possess some choice of connections. And a talent, Robbie, added Deanne. A special talent. Don't let her fool you. In many ways, your grandmother is more dangerous even than Ivor, you'll see. Robbie found that impossible to believe, but bit his lip for a moment before asking the next question. So, what do the Mona Lisas do? Indeed, what do the Mona Lisas do? Echoed Gwen. Up until now, we have, to a great extent, managed to coordinate and regulate crime across the world. We have acted as a safeguard to make sure that no two different organizations have a stake in going after the same objective. Particularly violent, brutal groups are crushed at our bidding, and we rein in those organizations that might be seriously unsettling governments or the criminal status quo. Also, we pursue our own endeavors as a group, pooling our resources. Lastly, and you may believe this or not as you wish, we have directed certain funds back to some of the people in the world who have most need of it. I work for no charity, Gwen, declared Wanda. I thought we were criminal masterminds, not old women collecting clothes for orphans and poor people. You want us rattling tins in the street, baking cake for one of your English garden fetes? No, to hell with this redirecting funds rubbish. I work with Wanda in mind, no one else. There was a sudden electronic bleep from the flat television screen. Delphine, at last, sighed Sun. May I come back to you on that point, Wanda? Asked Gwen. She turned to Soon. Please put Delphine on screen. Delphine Dumas's beautiful but disgruntled face shimmered into view on the large, flat monitor. Well, where are you? Delphine, I sometimes wonder if we should rescind your membership of the Mona Lisas. What was obvious to every other member of the organization was that my invitation was in code. Can't be bothered with these damned codes, Gwen. We are not schoolgirls in a dormitory. No one knows about us and no one could care less, retorted Delphine in her seductive continental accent, which was the vocal equivalent of chocolate. Now you have interrupted an important deal for me. For what? To show off your grandson? Hello, Robert. It had better be as good a prospect as the last weapons venture, eh? We all made a killing, did we not? We did indeed. This also goes some way to answering your point, Wanda, said Gwen. There was a significant outcome to that deal. Absolutely. Deanna, I have a client who will take 2,000 units off our hands this day if you can deliver them. An excellent business deal all round, a Mona Lisa success, I believe. I mean a different outcome entirely, Delphine. If you mean an outcome that justifies the very existence of the Mona Lisas, I agree. If you mean an outcome that led us away from being some secret police force, keeping a check on international criminals with no payment but with all the danger, I agree. If you mean an outcome that saw us exploiting our influence and contacts for a nice profit, allowing the Mona Lisas to become, finally, a vital criminal organization, I am in agreement, Gwen. Everything about the operation was magnificent, Delphine continued. From Deanne's stealing of the weapons from our super powerful friends, they probably still believe that Soon's replicas are the genuine article until they go into combat, of course, to Wanda's shipping them out as central heating components to the Persian Gulf. I set up the deal, of course, and I'm sure Gwen had some hand in the overall coordination, a good enterprise. I believe we should judge its success by another outcome. Soon, if you will.
All weapons were fitted with a tracker device. I can pinpoint the precise location of every individual grenade launcher we stole and sold. This was done when the weapon's accuracy, durability, and yield were modified and developed by my laboratories.
Tracking device, said Delphine scornfully. Why is it our business to care where they have gone, huh?
So sorry, let me finish, continued Sun. The weapons we sold in the Middle East seem to have been separated and transported to two distinct locations. In the first instance, to Pakistan, to increase their defenses along the Kashmir border.
So what? Responded Wanda impatiently. Pakistani, Indian, we're not taking sides, Diane said. If the Indians had offered more, then they would have got the weapons.
On the television screen, Delphine's head waggled up and down in agreement.
So sorry, please. The second smaller shipment went to the Democratic Republic of Daluge.
Daluge, cried Diane, bringing up her hands to cover her mouth. So some of the soldiers used them to shell some other soldiers or rebels. Why should we care? Came the voice from the screen.
On April 15th this year, 14 of our weapons were used to shell a marketplace in the northeastern part of the country. It is estimated that 90 people were killed in the initial attack. To quote from the Response newspaper, grenade launchers went on to hold the civilian population at bay in a state of terror. The people could not leave the marketplace until a squad of armed rebels entered the town. 250 men, women, and children are reported missing. Vanish.
Please God, say it is not so.
It is so, Diane.
Diane covered her face entirely. Wanda looked as if her skin had been bleached, but Delphine's face appeared angry in its resolve. If they hadn't been our weapons, somebody else would have sold grenade launchers to these people. Anyway, what can we do about these missing now, huh? It was agreed that we do not get mixed up in the politics of any region unless it interferes with us. Delphine rasped threateningly.
We all agreed this. It looks as if we are all involved, or engaged, as the French have it, replied Gwen. Those civilians were queuing in the marketplace to vote in an election.
Delphine's face flushed with anger.
Please,
continued Sun dispassionately.
A similar pattern continued in 6 other towns. Estimated dead or missing in Daluge as a direct or indirect use of our grenade launchers. 1,500 people.
Robbie had never heard a silence so painful before.
Delphine took her hands away from her face and stared at Sun directly. She would not hide from what she had done. Yet all joy seemed to have leached from the normally buoyant lady, and her colourful clothes seemed inappropriate to her mood. Sun continued in the neutral tone of voice of a newsreader.
After May, 2 of the grenade launchers were tracked to Rovia.
Oh, come on, what is this madness? We are criminal leaders, cried Delphine. What about breaking eggs to make omelettes? I never claimed I was a saint,
Sun patiently waited until Delphine had finished, then continued.
In July, a popular political candidate in Rovia was on the campaign trail. He works with the Americans in trying to halt the drugs trade. One of the Rovian gangster networks based around Olena Dathina decided to have the politician assassinated. His campaign coach and support vehicles were targeted and destroyed by grenade launchers.
My heart weeps for him, said Delphine sarcastically.
Only the intelligence was not correct. The politician was not in the region at all. The gangsters had destroyed a school party, 45 children and 6 teachers dead.
Silence once more, but not for long.
And did we fire those grenades, sir? Did we hand the gangsters these grenade launchers? No. So how are we guilty of these crimes? Asked the distorted voice from the screen speakers.
I was just illustrating that there are cascades of consequence to what we do.
I know there are consequences soon. I never thought we were in the toy trade. They were grenade launchers. What did everyone think they did, huh? Spray rose petals?
There was another silence for a moment. Robbie peered around the table. Gwen's eyes darted from Deanne to Wanda without even glancing at the face of the television screen. Sun appeared to be staring at something in the distance, far beyond the walls of the room, while Deanne began to knead her eyes with her fingers. Wanda continued to look as if her face had been drained of color. Only the two-dimensional figure of Delphine was set in a state of resentment. Wanda Silvano responded first in a slow, precise manner of speaking.
If a boy uses matches to set fire to a forest, and the family walking in this forest are trapped by flames and all killed, is the matchmaker responsible for their deaths?
Exactly, cried Delphine triumphantly. Yet the intention behind the creation of a box of matches is not to kill. It is to provide warmth and illumination, said Sun. Not so for a grenade launcher. So, the questions we have to ask ourselves tonight is what do we, the Mona Lisas, hope to achieve, declared Gwen. What do we want with all this wealth and power?
What does anyone want from wealth and power, huh? More wealth and power. Ask politicians.
Perhaps. But maybe there are politicians who believe they can change the world to make it a little less harsh for others. Might not we, the Mona Lisas, strive towards the same goal?
Oh, please. If this wasn't so sick, I would laugh, snorted Delphine. Why are any of us listening to Gwen? She has no overt organizational power. Who can she call upon? Ivor and us, and now her grandson, it seems. We should be making alliances with the South American cartels and giving focus and backing to some of the emerging African and Asian gangsters.
I do not agree, replied Sun. I think we should try to make a difference. At the moment, we are just thugs pretending we are something different.
Yes, but it's easy for the richest woman in the world to say I want no further part in pursuit of wealth, is it not, huh? Deanne, please see sense.
Deanne was slowly tracing her finger in a circle over the top of South America and the Gulf of Mexico. Her finger came to a halt over the West Indies. Then she shifted her head and addressed the table.
We are bad people, you know that. She stared at her colleagues in turn. We do some good in a bad profession, but our motives are always to help ourselves. We have ordered the deaths of cruel people, wicked people. We have turned our backs on innocents when they have strayed into our world, when they have needed our help. And we have lived off the money earned by decent men and women. We are bad people, but I can live with this. I know the only time I will meet me God is to be judged by him and sent spiraling downwards like a vulture shot from the sky. Then we have nothing to lose, have we not? Delphine responded. Not even our souls.
Deanne held up her hand. She had not finished.
And yet, there is a part of me that don't want to go to me grave with the deaths of any more children on me hands. We have crossed the line of wickedness, but no more for Deanne. Wanda, I implore you to spurn this madness, screamed the television screen. Did I kill those people? Asked Wanda, jutting out her chin defiantly. Did any of you take a gun to those people? No. Then why am I made to feel guilty? Because in no small way we are responsible for what happened. Because, in essence, we profited by their deaths. And because in your heart, Wanda, you know it, declared Gwen. We have excused ourselves, and, in the past, most of the victims of our actions were wicked villains. But these were not. These were ordinary people trying to scrape a dignified living, and we helped end them and their families, and their children. It is time to give something back. The defiance in Wanda's eyes waned. She paused before speaking again. We still take care of our own business? Wanda asked Gwen in as gentle a voice as Robbie had ever heard her use. We do? Sorry, Delphine. I did not join the Mona Lisas to become a butcher. I will listen to what they have to say, and there's an end to it. I understand. I would not work with you now, huh? You are all obsolete. You just don't get in my way, any of you. Delphine, do you forget to whom you are talking? Asked Sun-Ji. Her voice remained even, but one eyebrow was raised. Robbie had never seen her so fiery. It is unwise to threaten us. We have permitted you only so much power. You are exactly as big as we want you to become, Delphine. No more. Or maybe I'll surprise you soon. Gwen Carroll seemed to adjust something on her black, jeweled choker necklace. Her entire attention focused on Delphine Dumas. It was impossible to tell from the angle at which he sat, but Robbie could have sworn the necklace began flashing lights. Hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo, kin. Perinean charlatan mole, Robbie heard his grandmother utter beside him in a voice that seemed amplified and more resonant than it ever had before. Hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo, kin. Gwen Carroll addressed the TV screen. And how do you expect to find us, Delphine? I know where you all operate, huh? Where do I live, Delphine? Gwen asked. An expression of perplexity suddenly enveloped Delphine's face. What is my name, Delphine? In fact, what are any of our names? Robbie could not help but gaze in fascination as Delphine's face contorted from confusion into rage. How dare you play your mind games with me, you witch! How dare you— But Madame Sun had switched off the screen. Ladies, I am proud to call you friends, said Gwen, toasting the women around the table with the last of her cup of tea. But, as Sun put it so eloquently, it is time to make a difference. It is time to give something back. Now. This very night. Sun and I have taken steps already. Gwen, interrupted Wanda. If I ever discover you've played that mind trick on me, either or no either, I will have you killed. Dear Wanda, replied Gwen, her cup still raised. How would you ever know? Chapter 10. Hidden. A flurry of activity, as well as much preening and stubbing out of pungent Russian cigarettes, accompanied the arrival of the Mona Lisas back into the kitchen. Ivor, tell me the craft is checked and ready, said Gwen, the hulking specimens of humankind parting in front of her. Madame Sun's people say it is, Gwen, replied Ivor, instantly gliding to her side. The rest of the bodyguards automatically clustered around their bosses in well-rehearsed formations, immediately adopting looks of alert professionalism. Just before reaching the threshold of the kitchen doorway, Gwen turned and addressed the small army before her. We have an operation in South America tonight. Madame Sun's team will know of it already, but we have need of you all. Please follow me. Deanne and Wanda's people waited for the nods from their bosses. Then, without question or even a look of inquiry, they stepped into line behind the legion of muscle that represented Sun's bodyguards. Deanne managed to jostle her protection to be next in the procession, leaving Wanda and her bodyguards bringing up the rear.
A tall, good-looking Italian man in his late 20s led Wanda's people, contently gazing at one of Deanne's female bodyguards ahead of him, safe in the knowledge that he was ogling her behind his shades.
"Dangerous territory there, Mafia man," said Cleo defiantly, without turning around to look at the man staring at her.
Si, senora, but territory worth conquering, yes.
Cleo stopped mid-stride and peeled off from the back of Deanne's group to face the young Italian. Toe-to-toe, the slender West Indian woman and the tall young man faced each other, their reflections stretching to infinity in both their mirrored sunglasses.
"I dare you to try, Mafia man," said Cleo.
Without warning, a hand suddenly slapped the back of the young Italian's head with some force. He did not wince, but his grin faltered. Cleo's own smile spread wide, and she returned to her group.
"Giancarlo, I have warned you."
"Scusa, capo."
"I have known dogs with more control of themselves than you," continued Wanda in full rant. "Maybe I'll replace you with Dachshund. Even a mongrel yet to do toilet outside might be better. Maybe a dog might have got us ahead of Deanne's people, allowing them to go in front of us just to impress a woman. What the hell is wrong with you?"
"Scusa, capo."
"Imbeciles like you give Mafia a bad name."
At the head of the line, Robbie felt he could never become accustomed to the sight of his grandma, Ivor, and himself leading this throng of armed, lethal individuals through this familiar setting.
"Grandma, is it only women who are allowed into the Mona Lisas?"
"The world is a matriarchal place, Robbie. Is it not, Vasily?"
"Sorry, Madame Carol. Vasily does not understand the word matriarchal," replied the Russian from just behind them. "So sorry."
"I said the world is run by females, Vasily. Almost every society of creatures, from ants to elephants, from bees to lions, is governed by females. It is the natural order of things, don't you think?"
"If you say so, Madame Carol."
"But you don't believe it, Vasily?"
"It is not the Russian way, I think."
"I think Mother Russia would disagree, Vasily." Robbie noticed the corner of Vasily's thick mustache turn upward slightly.
"Is true. I am fond of my own mother."
To answer your question, sweetie, the answer is yes. Only women may join the Mona Lisas, explained Grandma Gwen. There are tensions enough between us as it is, but it is our belief a man, through no other fault than that of his gender, would try to rule the Mona Lisas and use us as an extension of his own organization. We let the gangsters and organized criminals of the world claim that their organizations are run by men. That suits us, and to the greater extent, they're right. But we can bring our influence to bear upon many of them without seeking the attendant notoriety or risk that the leader has to endure. Anyway, who would suspect a bunch of old dears?
"Grandma, why haven't Mum and I discovered any of this before?"
I'm surprised that wasn't your first question. It has been in the past. You have discovered us before, Robbie, several times. Remember? Hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo, kingdom. Remember now? Instantly, snatches of images, sounds, feelings, and memories that had been locked deep within a compartment of Robbie's brain previously unknown to him seeped into life. One memory began to expand, to fill his conscious thought, and suddenly he was much younger than he was now, hiding beneath Grandma's beautiful map table. Shuffling and contorting, shuffling and shifting without end as 10 legs stretched and flex. A foot connects with him. All the legs draw in. The 5 faces of his grandma and 4 aunts peer down at him indulgently. The young Robbie puts a finger to his lips and tells them they must be quiet. A second memory swelled like a bubble, enveloping his attention. Younger still, dashing into Grandma's kitchen full of people. In one hand, the heavy old revolver that fired caps, in the other, his blue water pistol. Not even a glance at the bits of metal targeting him. straight over to a huge potato-faced man with thick, bony crags forming a brow over his deep-set eyes.
"You're ugly," the young Robbie had said. "Let my grandma go and I'll let you live."
"Let her go? But we're not—" "You must be Robert," the spud-faced man replied, chuckling to himself.
"Bad answer."
The young Robbie fired both his guns. A gangly West Indian man feigned taking a bullet to his chest, while Spudface got his face drenched. "A fine shot, Robert," Spudface replied, his chuckle developing into a hearty laugh. He wipes away the droplets of water from the crevices in his forehead and adds in a more serious tone, "There is something of your father in you, I see." A new memory now, only sounds, a time not that long ago. Robbie sensed that he was feeling betrayed. "Robbie, please try to understand," pleaded Ivor. "It is precisely because I care for you that I don't want you involved. People will die. This is not child's play. I will not have you harmed. You are family to me. I'm not your family, and you're not my father, and I'm already involved. Robbie, you're not listening to me. What's the point? You won't remember any of this anyway." The memories burst and Robbie's mind suddenly shot forward to the present. He was almost stumbling down the hallway with Grandma and Ivor by his side, followed by the most intimidating group of people who had ever marched along a Bristolian hallway. "But why couldn't I recall any of it?" said Robbie, not meaning to give voice to his thoughts. Turning towards Ivor, Robbie had noticed that Grandma's bodyguard had flipped open a panel within the armrest of the wheelchair and was tapping a code on a keypad. In response, the doors to the lift in the hallway opened, followed by a second... In response, the doors to the lift in the hallway opened, followed a second later by a loud clank, and the back wall of the lift slid aside to reveal a smooth passageway hewn into rock. Not even in Robbie's newly released memories had he ever seen anything like this before. With a rapid downward stroke of his arms, Ivor propelled himself forward through the lift to come to a halt beside a metal rail running the length of the tunnel. He pulled down a flat piece of metal attached to the rail and, one after the other, Gwen Carroll, then Sun Ji, followed by Deanne Walker and finally Wanda Silvano, sat down upon it. Gwen pressed a switch, and the metal seat began to glide along the rail and further along the rock tunnel as the lady's muscle wheeled or strode along beside them. Almost immediately, the passageway doubled back upon itself, then stretched ahead, dropping downwards and curving slightly, so Robbie could not make out what lay ahead of them. Doors and other tunnels led off from the central route, but no one even glanced at them. The wall lift continued forward and downwards at a sedate speed, accompanied by the rank of bodyguards, their marching feet upon the floor, echoing and re-echoing around the rock walls as if an entire army battalion was trudging through Gwen Carroll's property. The passageway ended at a huge, well-lit cavern, which appeared to be a natural formation in the rock. Dominating virtually the entire floor area of the cave was a smooth, hump-backed vehicle of some kind, the size of a small warehouse. Robbie had never seen, read, or heard about anything like it before, and doubted that there was another aircraft like it in existence. Its outer skin seemed to be fashioned from luminous fish scales, but when Robbie inspected them closely, they appeared to be tens of thousands of mirrors covering the entire aircraft, reflecting him back perfectly. Yet, hardly any features such as vents, engine exhaust, or windows broke through the surface of its outer skin. Only a lowered ramp at the back of the vessel disrupted its impeccable lines. The hood. One of Madame Sun's mimic technologies, Robbie. It's capable of space travel, and speeds exceeding Mach 8 far faster in space, explained Ivor, who had coasted up beside him noiselessly. Sun is so far ahead of all other similar technologies it's embarrassing, But don't people see it when they look into the cave? Asked Robbie, looking at the thick, gauze-like material that appeared to cover the mouth of the cavern, offering hazy views straight out into the Avon Gorge. Madame Sun again. She uses the same stuff to create a working environment for her miners on the asteroids. Outside it appears to be ordinary cliff face that has caved in. You can climb on the material and it behaves like rock. We haven't even had a problem with abseilers. They just don't notice any difference. It folds away for the few moments it takes us to launch, to be replaced by a holographic projection. Even as he stood there, astonished at the secrets that were being shown to him, Robbie suddenly had a feeling that Ivor was reluctant to leave his side. In the time they had been talking, Robbie's 3 aunts and all their bodyguards had trooped up the ramp and onto the aircraft. Only Gwen and, of course, Ivor, as well as himself, remained in the cavern. Robbie found the silence unnerving and ominous as his grandma approached him, adjusting her necklace that began to emit short pulses of bright light. "We have to leave now, Robbie, but you will remain here." Gwen Carroll's voice seemed to surge and expand, filling the entire cavern and Robbie's mind. "Oxygen, cuckoo, domain. Once we have gone, you will feel tired and feel a desperate need to lie down to sleep." In a matter of seconds, Robbie unaccountably began to feel tiredness stealing up his body like paralysis. "Not going back, Grandma," he said drowsily. "Not going back to Sage." "Not now, Robbie. We will talk about such matters and your stepfather when I return. Don't resist the tiredness. Let it wash over you and lull you." "Don't want to forget again." "Yes, Robbie, forget. It is safer if you remember nothing. You want to be safe, of course. The sleep is overwhelming. The tiredness is insistent. It has been such a long day for you. You need the warmth of bed. You will go to bed and sleep long and peacefully. You will forget." Why couldn't I remember the other times? Robbie asked himself, but he was finding it close to impossible to think clearly. Grandma's voice was overpowering as it coaxed him into unconsciousness, and the flashing lights on the necklace made his eyes bewildered and tired. Something Grandma said had unlocked them. The last resistance in Robbie's mind replied, "Something to do with kingdom." "The warmth, Robbie. You need warmth. Your bed here is safe, peaceful, cozy. You will go to bed. You will only remember breaking into the house and going to your room where you fell asleep. You will remember nothing else. Remember nothing else." The last barricade to the invasion of tiredness brought on by his grandma's projected voice was eroding rapidly. All her suggestions seemed so wise and inevitable. You will remember nothing of the Mona Lisas or their bodyguards. Ivor will simply be your friend, and I will be your grandmother. You will remember nothing of the fortune teller. The fortune teller. A dwindling part of Robbie's mind was putting up resistance. However, now Robbie could not even remember what he had forgotten, but the word kingdom kept repeating itself like a heartbeat. Isambard Kingdom Brunel? No, that was not it. An element? But there are so many elements, he told himself. But it was the first element. Hydrogen. Hydrogen Kingdom. No, there was more to it. A desk, scratches and letters carved into a desk. Hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo, kingdom. The tiredness that had overwhelmed Robbie's mind evaporated in an instant. As Gwen Carroll touched her necklace and the flashing lights vanished, she turned away from her grandson, still believing him to be in a trance. "Is that the talent Aunt Deanne was talking about, Grandma? Is that what you did to Aunt Delphine? Hypnotism?" Robbie asked. Hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo, kingdom. Robbie found himself quite relishing his chance to wield his own surprise as his grandma and Ivor stared back at him in astonishment. "Damn it, Gwen," replied Ivor. "I knew something like this would happen. You always push it too far." "You will go to bed, Robert," said Grandma, but there was a note of alarm in her voice now which broke the mesmeric spell entirely. "Oxygen, cuckoo, domain. You will hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo, kingdom. No, I won't, and I don't feel tired, and I don't need warmth. What does hydrogen kingdom mean, anyway? What does oxygen, cuckoo, domain mean?" Gwen Carroll's gaze turned first to the aircraft and then to her bodyguard, looking for counsel. But Ivor was staring at the roof of the cavern, sighing deeply. For the first time that evening, Robbie witnessed his grandma in a state of uncertainty. Then something settled in her mind. She grabbed her grandson's shoulders and spoke softly to him. "Hydrogen, pilfer, conflict, cuckoo, kingdom is a hypnotic trigger phrase to unleash all the memories I have barred from you through hypnotism. Oxygen, cuckoo, domain locks them away again," she explained. "Pyrenean charlatan mole locks delphines. They are just words I associate with the person, but am unlikely to string together accidentally in normal conversation. Hydrogen kingdom. Why am I hydrogen kingdom? Hydrogen and oxygen are the combined elements of water, which is crucial to life on this planet at least. You are vital to me. Kingdom, domain, because you and your mother rule a large part of my life. Don't ask me about the others now." She searched into her grandson's eyes and appeared to recognize something there. "It is fitting. Your father was one of the few people in the world I could not hypnotize too." "And the necklace? Lights and the amplified voice help you to produce a trance?" Robbie asked. "The necklace not only modulates my voice into a lower register, but also produces a separate infrasonic sound at 2 Hz. You won't hear anything. It is a frequency so low that humans cannot hear it, but produces potent physical and psychological sensations and makes subjects more susceptible to a trance-like state." Gwen Carroll glanced impatiently at the hood. "I can explain more to you when I return, sweetie, but it is imperative that I leave now." "Let me come with you, Grandma," pleaded Robbie. "You have no idea what you will be embarking on, sweetie, notwithstanding the fact that Ivor would never forgive me. But maybe I can help you." Gwen Carroll smiled and kissed him on the forehead. "I have been engaged in this for years, Robbie, and I have Ivor." She kissed him again. "But it is not safe, and I would keep you safe. Have you wondered where your combat moves and self-defense skills come from? To keep you safe, I had Ivor teach and train you, then I embedded his training into your unconsciousness, only to be accessed when someone threatens to get dangerously violent with you. Anthony Cairns Nash and Billy Mills." Robbie almost exhaled their names at the revelation. "That's why I could fight them. It was like an instinct." "Indeed, although I confess that my intention was not for you to hospitalize a fellow student with those skills," Gwen replied, glancing once more at the unique aircraft called the Hood. "I really must go. We're on a schedule, Robbie." "Don't abandon me here, Grandma. I'm safer with you than I am with Gabriel Sage," Robbie beseeched his grandmother. "Take me with you, and I promise I'll do what you say and stay wherever you put me." Grandma Gwen pondered the turn of events for a moment, then turned an inquiring face towards Ivor Noon. "No, Gwen, absolutely not. It is reckless. This whole phase of the Mona Lisa's operation is reckless enough as it is." "It is now 5:20 to 11, Ivor. Even with the time difference, we are in danger of being a tad tardy. Robbie can do no harm in the Hood." "And when does it stop?" Ivor responded. "On what venture do we not take Robbie?" "I think the old girl can still identify when she might be placing her family in peril, Ivor." "Let's hope so, Gwen." Ivor turned his scowl away from his boss, as if he could no longer stand to look at her. The decision had been made, however. Just before they reached the ramp of the aircraft, Robbie deliberately stepped in front of Ivor Noon's wheelchair. Ivor, I've only just remembered a time when I said that you and I are not family. You are family to me. I was wrong. Sorry.
Great, Robbie. That just makes the whole situation worse.
Ivor leaned in to whisper to Robbie, even though they were the only two left in the cavern.
What goes on here with the Mona Lisas is the reverse of family. I know Vasily, Cleo, and the others, but I would have no hesitation in leaving them if they fell behind. I might even have to turn on them one day, but you are family to me too. Therefore, you make me weak. What you are about to become involved in is dangerous in the extreme. I cannot concentrate on what I have to do if I have half a mind on worrying about you too. Understand?
Robbie nodded, but he could not feel sorry or fearful. He had to hide his grinning. It seemed adventure had come calling for him at long last.